Hey guys, good to be able to talk to you guys and get moving forward. Even though yesterday, obviously, we were out with a power outage, hopefully you guys are having a good extra restful day off. But we want to get back into um, our information about this particular chapter leading up to World War One, and we're going to move a little faster today. We're going to cover a couple more countries. Just to remind you, we mentioned that there's a lot of trends going on in Europe, and one of the biggest countries at the time, the up-and-coming country, was Germany. They had unified under King Wilhelm I and Otto von Bismarck, and you see Bismarck there, this gruff-looking individual. Bismarck provokes a couple of wars. He helps unify Germany together with realpolitik, where he makes decisions based on what's practical for the country and not necessarily what's moral. Okay, and remember, Wilhelm I dies after being coronated here as the Emperor of Germany, and he is going to lead Germany for just a few years until, when he dies, his grandson Wilhelm II will take over, and that's a little bit on the dangerous side because Wilhelm wants to prove something. Right? He's building up the military. He wants to make Germany the dominant power in Europe. All right. And Germany, they're on the rise. They're, like I said, a young up and coming country. Now, let's talk about France, all right, Germany's neighbor to the west. Okay. First of all, let's mention this that France is a very politically corrupt country at the time. There had been all types of government changes where they had gone from a monarchy to a democracy back to kind of a constitutional monarchy, and then they were in the midst of shifting around, and political corruption was not unusual at all. A lot of scandals, government officials were prone to bribery. It's not necessarily what you call a good place, all right? So the first thing that we need to know that you might want to write down about them is that they're undergoing some real governmental problems in terms of corruption, okay? Second thing we need to know, all right, take a look at the map here. All right, remember, France lost a war to Prussia, which unified Germany together, and that made them terribly bitter. Okay, now losing is one thing, but it gets really bad when, in terms of the bitterness. And you see right there, obviously, this region of France with Paris in it. Remember, right outside of Paris in Versailles, where the Hall of Mirrors is where Germany crowned Wilhelm I emperor, and the French are really upset about that. They're angry, they're bitter, and they're going to remember this. But something else they're bitter about. They lost an important territory. You see right here next to the border on Germany there's a territory called Alsace-Lorraine. Okay? Alsace and Lorraine, part of the end of the Franco-Prussian War was France had to turn over Alsace-Lorraine to Germany. Okay? And this is a big deal, not just because of land area, but Alsace-Lorraine was rich in natural resources, and there was a lot of factory production and scientific expansion going on at the time. So having to give it up is not something that the French wanted to do. All right. So it's a country that's politically corrupt. They've lost an important piece of territory that they're bitter about, and they're still upset that the Germans crowned their emperor right in their backyard. Okay. They're not going to forget these things. All right. They hold grudges. They remember the German emperor being crowned. They remember how Germany took one of their most productive territories away from them. Okay. So ultimately, France is going to hold this very bitter grudge. They got a lot of problems, but I don't want you to think that France is inherently devoid of anything good. There's a lot of good going on in France. Okay. Culturally, France is going to become very important. This time period, the late 1800s and early 1900s in France, they refer to as La Belle Epoque, or the beautiful time, or the beautiful period. Okay, there are some major worldwide innovations going on that culturally that are going to spread to they'll start in France but spread to the rest of the world. And the first one is an art movement called Impressionism. Okay, Impressionism has nothing to do with doing impressions of other people. No, I'm not going to field that question because people always ask. All right, so Impressionism, it's an art movement. Now, It's an art movement characterized by vague brushstrokes that give you an impression. They're blurred. All right. And let me give you an example of an impressionist artwork, and this will help you out to understand. This is one of Claude Monet's famous paintings. Okay. You can see that the way that the painting is made, they're kind of blurred strokes. It's not sharp. It's not crisp. It's not lifelike. All right. It's blurred on purpose to give you an impression of what the scene is. Get it? Hence the term impressionism. Like, it's not specific, but you can tell that there are people in a boat on a body of water. There's a sun in the background. Maybe it's rising, maybe it's setting. Hard to say, but you can tell what it is. Okay, and this is an art movement that is revolutionary for a lot of reasons. All right, one of them is that up until now, paintings and artwork, usually people wanted it to be lifelike. Okay, they wanted to have as much detail and accuracy as possible. And Claude Monet and other individuals like him, and you don't need to remember the names of the artists, but if you hear of Monet or Renoir, those are famous impressionists at the time, and they're French people. Most of the original impressionists are very French and very much in this style. All right, and they they do this for a particular reason. They move away from the accuracy of it. Okay, and this is something that is really interesting here because ultimately it's a response to something happening in the world. All right, ask yourself this: why would artists who have been making lifelike pictures and portraits, trying to get more and more accurate all the time, why would they suddenly change and start making paintings like this that have blurred strokes and only give you an impression of what's going on, just a big picture, no detail? Why would they change? All right. And the answer has to do with technology. It's a response to what's happening in technology. Okay. In the late 1800s, what piece of technology was becoming more common that allowed you to get the vividness, the lifelike nature of the world? Photography. Okay, pictures. Photography was becoming more prevalent. Back in the day, if you wanted a family portrait, or a portrait of yourself, you had to sit for a painting, and somebody would work painstakingly for hours on end to paint a portrait of you and or your family. All right, but now that is ultimately kind of made obscure in a sense, that you don't need a lifelike portrait made because you could sit down for a photograph and be done in less than 2 minutes. Um, so ultimately, artists changed their style. They adapted to the situation. Now, we bring this up for a lot of reasons. One is that this art movement becomes a worldwide phenomenon where people start mimicking the Impressionists. But two, think about this. How does art and culture adapt to the technology, right? Think about technologies that are prominent in your time right now, and think about how we adapt, how art adapts, how culture adapts. I'll give you one example. Okay, as music has gotten more technical, and you all can remember this. Do you remember auto tuning? When music stars, superstars, or especially rappers started using auto tune, the technology was there, and so they adapted what they did to work with technology. Now, that's a little different than what the Impressionists did. They were working against technology, but ultimately we change over time. Okay? Culture adapts and responds to what's going on. Sometimes it's a positive response, sometimes it's a negative response, right? Claude Monet's paintings, by the way, are extraordinarily famous. If you have a painting by Claude Monet, it would be worth a lot of Monet. Oh, I know you like that joke. All right, so look, La Belle Epoque, Impressionism, a major art movement at the time, and it originates in France. Okay, something else big that's going on. In 1888, France was holding the World Fair. Okay, and I know that this is something you all probably have no concept of, but back then world technologies and what every country was doing is not obvious through social media, internet, and other technological avenues. culture spread a little more slowly. And so every few years, nations of the world would get together in a different spot and hold a world fair. And they would showcase their technology, their art, their culture, everything about their country so that other people could experience what was going on. And in 1888, Paris, France the uh, hosted the World's Fair. And this is what's interesting. Every year that a city would host the World's Fair, obviously they want to put on their best face, their best, uh, the best of everything their country has to offer. Okay, and France said, "Look, we want to demonstrate to the world how fantastic we are, how amazing we are, and if we're going to do this, we need to have a big centerpiece, something that's going to impress the rest of the world and leave them gasping." All right. And to do this, they went to an architect, a designer named Gustav Eiffel. Okay. And Gustav Eiffel, for the World's Fair, came up with a concept for the Eiffel Tower. And you can see it here, the progress of the Eiffel Tower being built for the World's Fair. And essentially, this massive steel structure at the time in 1888 was the world's tallest man made object. Okay. And that's a huge deal because it's such an achievement for a number of reasons. One of which is that it's going to be the world's tallest man made structure for another almost 40 years. It's not going to be until the 1920s, when the Empire State Building is built in New York City, that anything is taller than the Eiffel Tower. All right. And originally, when the Eiffel Tower was built, people were a little skeptical of it. They weren't sure if they liked it or not. But at the World's Fair, it was received very well, and Gustav Eiffel becomes an international celebrity. Okay, and I want to show you how big time this was. Eiffel, you can see right here, he's on the cover of a magazine, Gustav Eiffel, and you can learn a lot by the cover of this magazine. Okay, look at Eiffel right here, and you see him. Obviously, he looks the part. I wish I had hair like that. Okay, but notice that Gustav himself, the way they draw Gustav Eiffel, is he's literally as tall or a little bit taller than the tower itself, meaning that he is larger than his creation. And what do you see uh, him holding his hand over top of next to the Eiffel Tower? It's the pyramid, the Great Pyramid at Giza, all right, saying that he has eclipsed anything the Egyptians have done. Now, something else you see, look on his waist right there. It looks like, I always think it looks like a walkie-talkie, but there's a little object and it's tilted. And it's hard to see, but that right there is a building, one of the churches or cathedrals at the time that were some of the medieval uh, like construction projects in France. And you're saying that, they're saying that essentially even the Eiffel Tower has eclipsed that. Okay. So Gustav Eiffel becomes this revolutionary figure who, changes the game in terms of culture and what science and technology can do. All right. France wants to show off, and they do a fantastic job. In fact, look, it had such an impression on the world that in 1893, the next World's Fair was held in Chicago in the United States. And Chicago was racking their brain about, look, we have to do something as amazing as Eiffel did in creating the Eiffel Tower. And incidentally, they found a young designer named Ferris who'd had the idea of a rotating wheel that people could ride on. And the Ferris wheel became a sensation in Chicago. Now, fun fact there, all right? We don't have Eiffel Towers at carnivals, but we do have Ferris wheels, right? Also, France at the time, you got Impressionism, you got the Eiffel Tower, you have science as well. If you've never heard of Marie Curie, she's one of the leading chemists in the world at the time. Her and her husband actually worked together on discovering radioactive materials and working with radioactive materials. They influence the world and teach people find out about radioactivity. In fact, radium, a material they worked with, was ultimately what made them sick to the point where radiation poisoning affected them and caused their death. Marie Curie, by the way, has an element named after her, curium. I want to be that big time. They could have an element and it'll be called scalecium. Perhaps, perhaps. All right, so you've got France, this very politically corrupt country. They're bitter about their loss in a war with Germany, but they've got the La Belle Epoque. It's the beautiful period. There's a lot of great culture coming out of France. Okay, one other area of importance to mention about France, they have a strong emphasis on colonial expansion. Okay, colonial expansion. They want to become a major colonial power. All right, and so they're expanding into Africa. They in Great Britain have more of Africa than anybody else, but also France has expanded into another place. Okay, we know that they're in Africa, but they're also in a place called Indochina. And if you look down at the world map I've put on here, you can see the little green areas where we call Indochina, and they refer to it as Indochina because it's between India and China. If you look to the left, westward, you see India, the little subcontinent there, and above Indochina is China, so they call it Indochina. Today, it's modern-day Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. You see in the purple section, they go to this particular region, and you can see at they start working their way inland from the coast in 1883, and they start taking more of the area. Why this area of Indochina, which is mostly modern-day Vietnam? And once again, it's for resources. In particular, and I'm not trying to sound stereotypical, but one of the things they get from there that is important to them is rice. Um, Vietnam area has quite a bit of rice, and the people there are forced to turn over a good deal of their rice, and the French have no problem taking it from them. All right. Another major crop from the area is indigo. Okay, a bluish dye that we use frequently. In fact, indigo is used very much in blue jeans. Okay, not that denim was huge back then. In fact, in 1883, it hadn't. I don't even think Levi Strauss had invented it yet. All right, but that's beside the point. You get the idea. All right, indigo was used as a dye for clothing and other issues. All right, so France, they're heavily involved in colonialism and imperialism as well. Now we're going to talk about one other country today, and this one's a short one because they're important but not that important. All right, Italy, my Italian brethren. Okay, Italy has a story that's similar to Germany. All right, and you can see on this map that the Italian area is in the 1850s and 60s, or excuse me, in the 1850s, it is a fragmented group of little states. Okay, and you can see it here, like Tuscany. You've probably heard of that before. Or if you look at right above Tuscany, up and to the left, you see an area called Parma. Oh, Parmesan cheese. All right, look up there, you see Venetia. All right, something that's Venetian. Oh man, there's Rome. Oh, I've heard of Rome. There's the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, Sardinia, Corsica, places you've probably heard of, but they're fragmented little kingdoms. Okay, just like Germany was. All right. Now, Italy, for similar reasons to Germany, you've got a guy who is part of the Italian movement to unify. His name is Count Camillo Cavour. All right, and Camillo Cavour is he is like Wilhelm I. He wants to unify these little states into one nation, and he says, "Look, we got enough commonalities to where we should be unifying together. We should be working together. We got common language, a lot of common culture, and it's not all the same. We're talking generally." Okay, but he says we have enough in common where we need to come together. If we pool our resources and work together, we can unify. All right. Now, remember, European countries in this 1850s and 1860s, there's a big trend towards unifying. It's like consolidating schools. They're like, oh, look at all the good things that we can do. Okay. Now, long story short, Count Camillo Cavour does help unify Italy together into one giant Italian nation. All right, and Italy, they're responding to the trend of the time, that unifying together, bringing our resources and our strength together. And even though they think they're hot stuff, they're really not as strong as they think. Even when they're unified together, Italy is we're going to call them a moderate power, meaning that they're not weak, but they're not exactly what we would call super strong either. All right, and that's where we'll leave off for the moment. We will talk about Austria-Hungary tomorrow.